The phone call came on a Tuesday. The world did not stop spinning. The sun continued to shine outside my window, which felt like a betrayal. My father was gone. The finality of those words echoed in a space inside me that I never knew existed. It was a hollow, aching void. I had known loss before, the gentle passing of grandparents who lived long, full lives. But this was different. This was a violent tearing, a story cut short, a life consumed by the shadows of alcoholism. The grief was not a soft blanket of sadness. It was a storm of jagged edges, a torrential downpour of what-ifs and why-nots that left me breathless and utterly broken. The pain was a physical presence, a constant weight pressing down on my chest. It made it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to simply be. Every corner of my home held a memory, a ghost of a laugh, a faded echo of his voice. Simple things like the smell of coffee brewing or the sight of his favorite armchair would trigger a fresh wave of sorrow that felt powerful enough to pull me under. This grief was complicated, tangled with years of worry, moments of anger, and a desperate, unfulfilled hope for his recovery. It was a heavy, suffocating cloak that I could not seem to shrug off, no matter how hard I tried to stand up straight. In those first few weeks, I felt like I was moving through a thick fog. The world outside continued its frantic pace, but my own internal clock had stopped on the day he died. Conversations felt distant, like I was listening from underwater. People offered their condolences, their voices soft with pity, but their words couldn't penetrate the wall of shock that surrounded me. I would nod and say thank you, but the truth was, I felt nothing and everything all at once. The silence he left behind was the loudest sound I had ever heard, a constant, deafening reminder of all that was lost and all that could never be. This was not a peaceful farewell. It was the messy, heartbreaking conclusion to a long and painful battle. It was the loss of the man he was and the man he could have been. I was grieving for the father of my childhood, the one who taught me to ride a bike and told the best bedtime stories. And I was grieving for the man I had lost to his addiction long before his final breath. The layers of this loss were complex and deep, a tangled knot of love and pain that I had to somehow, some way, begin to unravel. It was the start of a journey I never asked for, into a darkness I wasn't sure I could navigate. In the quiet, heavy aftermath of the funeral, I expected to be surrounded by love. I thought my family and friends would form a circle around me, a human shield against the crushing weight of my sorrow. But the opposite happened. The phone calls trickled to a stop. The visits became less frequent. It was as if the complexity of my grief, the shame and stigma of alcoholism, made people uncomfortable. They didn't know what to say, so they said nothing at all. Their silence was not malicious, but it created an island of isolation where I felt completely and utterly stranded with my pain. This withdrawal felt like a second loss, a quiet abandonment that amplified my loneliness. The people I thought I could lean on seemed to step back, perhaps afraid of the depth of my sadness or unsure how to help with a grief so complicated. I found myself navigating this treacherous landscape alone. The emptiness of my father's absence was now compounded by the emptiness of rooms that were once filled with friends. The quiet in my home grew heavier, each tick of the clock a reminder of my solitude. I was not just grieving a death. I was grieving the support system I thought I had. The world seemed to expect me to move on, to put the sadness away neatly on a shelf. But grief doesn't work that way. It is messy and unpredictable. My friends, caught up in their own lives, their own joys and daily routines, couldn't understand why I wasn't better yet. They didn't see the invisible battle I was fighting every single day just to get out of bed. Their well-meaning but misguided attempts to cheer me up, "At least he's not in pain anymore," felt like a dismissal of my own. My pain was very much alive, and I was all alone with it. This period of profound loneliness forced me to turn inward in a way I never had before. There was no one to distract me, no one to fill the silence. It was just me and my raw, unfiltered emotions. In that quiet, I had to confront the anger, the resentment, and the deep well of sadness I had been trying to avoid. It was a terrifying place to be, this echo chamber of my own grief. But it was also the place where the first, tiny seeds of healing were unknowingly planted. The solitude, as painful as it was, became the fertile ground where I would have to learn to save myself. In the depths of my solitude, when the silence was at its most deafening, I found myself turning to the only place I had left to go, inward and upward. I began to pray. Not the formal, rehearsed prayers of my childhood, but raw, honest conversations with God. I poured out all my anger, my confusion, and my heartbreak. I yelled, I cried, and I questioned everything. There were no immediate answers, no lightning bolts from the sky. Instead, what I found was a quiet, steadying presence. It was a sense of being heard without judgment, a feeling of being held in my brokenness. Prayer became my anchor in the storm. It was a daily practice of surrender, of letting go of the need to understand everything. I started to see that holding on to my anger toward my father was like drinking poison and expecting him to be the one who suffered. It was only hurting me. Through prayer, I began the slow, difficult work of forgiveness. I forgave him for the pain his addiction caused, for the promises he broke, and for leaving too soon. And in doing so, I began to forgive myself for the times I was angry with him, for the helplessness I felt, and for not being able to save him. This spiritual connection was my lifeline. It taught me that I was not truly alone, even when I felt like it. I started spending time outdoors, finding solace in the vastness of the sky and the resilience of nature. I would watch the sunrise and feel a sense of renewal, a quiet promise that after every darkness, there is a dawn. I saw God not in a church building, but in the steady strength of an old oak tree and the gentle unfolding of a flower petal. Nature became my sanctuary, a place where I could breathe deeply and feel connected to something larger than my own pain. Slowly, gently, a shift began to happen within me. The hard, jagged edges of my grief started to soften. The anger began to dissolve, replaced by a quiet compassion. I started to separate the man from the disease, to remember the father I loved underneath the layers of his struggle. Self-reflection showed me that his journey was his own, and his choices were not a reflection of my worth. This understanding was a whisper of grace, a profound gift that allowed me to release the burden of blame and finally begin to heal from the inside out. As the weight of anger and resentment lifted, I found I had room to breathe again. My healing journey was not about forgetting my father or erasing the pain of his loss. Instead, it was about integrating the experience into who I am and choosing to live a life of purpose and joy in his honor. I realized that the greatest tribute I could pay to him was not to drown in the sorrow of his death, but to rise from it with renewed strength. I started living for myself, making choices that nourished my soul and brought light back into my world. The power was mine all along. I rediscovered my love for creativity. I picked up a paintbrush for the first time in years, letting the colors flow onto the canvas in a way that words could not. I wrote in my journal, not just about the pain, but about my hopes, my dreams, and the small moments of beauty I was starting to notice again. Each brushstroke, each sentence, was an act of reclaiming my life. It was a declaration that my story was not over. This creative expression became a powerful form of therapy, allowing me to transform my grief into something tangible, something beautiful, something that was uniquely mine. My own journey from darkness to light ignited a fire within me to help others who might be walking a similar path. I learned that my story of loss and healing was not just my own. It was a universal story of the human spirit's capacity to endure. I started sharing my experience, not as a tale of tragedy, but as a message of hope. I wanted anyone who felt lost in the shadows of grief, especially grief complicated by addiction, to know that they are not alone. I wanted them to know that their pain is valid and that healing in their own time and in their own way is possible. Today, I still have moments of sadness. Grief is not a linear path with a final destination, but now the sadness is gentle, a soft reminder of a love that endures. It no longer consumes me. I have learned that we cannot choose what happens to us, but we can always choose how we respond. We can choose to let our pain define us, or we can choose to let it refine us. My hope for you, for anyone reading this, is that you choose to believe in your own resilience. Your journey is your own, and within you is the strength to find the light, to breathe it in, and to begin again.